Very much for coming to this Esoteric Quest open house. So we're going to be talking about this year's Esoteric Quest, which, as you can see there, is going to be happening in Iceland from the 24th to the 29th of August. And there's also a pre-conference and a post-conference aspect to it. This is actually the 12th Esoteric Quest that the Open Center has done in the last 21 years. Nobody imagined when we began that it would go on for this long. It all began in Bohemia back in 1995. So I'll tell you the story of how these quests began and how give you a little bit of an overview before we go into the whole world of Iceland. So my name's Ralph White. So I'm one of the people who started the Open Center, and I've been doing these esoteric quests since the very beginning. And this is my colleague here, Andrea Lamanto, who's the Director of Registration, known to one and all for her charming and meticulous ways. So we'll be here to respond to any questions that you have about this upcoming event. I know many of you have been. I look around here, I see plenty of familiar faces. I also see plenty of new faces as well. So I'll start off by just giving you a little history of where these quests came from and how they've evolved, and then we'll go more into the details of this year's quest. So you can see that up there. That's what we're going to be doing this year. It's going to be out in a place called the Snaefellsnes. Sounds obscure, doesn't it? It ain't easy to get your tongue around Icelandic. But we think of fell. Anybody who's been to the north of England and knows the fells up in the Lake District, it's amazing the number of words that actually come from the Norse that are now in English. So Snai, it means snow. So Snaefell, the Great Snow Mountain. That's actually not the Great Snow Mountain, but that's Kirkjufell. That's a holy mountain that is very close to where we're going to be out on the coast of. It's about 3.5 hours west of Reykjavik. But I'll show you a map and so on. So before we get into that, let me just give you a quick overview for those of you who are new to it about the esoteric quests. They began in 1995. The first one was called the Rosicrucian Enlightenment Revisited. I'll just say that again, the Rosicrucian Enlightenment Revisited. It was on the Western mystery tradition in Bohemia, and it was done in a little town in the Šumava Mountains of southern Bohemia that I stumbled across back in the early 90s, right after communism. And it had been hidden behind the Iron Curtain for 60 years. Nobody was paying attention to it. It was not Disneyfied. It was pretty much intact. I stumbled into it one night in the very early 90s, was stunned to wake up in the morning and find that there were red roses around all the walls. There was a castle with a mysterious tower rising up from it. I stayed in a 16th century building, threw open the windows in the morning, the great casement windows. There was a river rushing down below, the birds were singing. I could see the castle in the distance. And then, as I began to inquire about where we were, I realized we had stumbled across the southern Bohemian mecca of alchemists, completely or almost completely unknown in the West. And so I spent a few years trying to persuade my Czech friends. I said, you realize you're sitting on a pivotal moment in Western cultural and spiritual history here, but after 60 years of communist Nazis and 300 years of the Habsburgs, they weren't very attuned to their own history. So anyway, it took a while to get, and I tried to convince some of my Czech friends to do it, but I realized it wasn't happening, and then I just wound up, I'm just going to have to do it myself. So it was one of those experiences where back in 1994 I invited everybody I admired in the Western esoteric tradition to come to this obscure little town that nobody had ever heard of. And to my absolute amazement, every single person I invited said yes, with the exception of one person was no longer giving public talks at that point. And so it all began with what Gnosis magazine, for those of you who remember Gnosis, referred to as an esoteric Woodstock. Everybody who was anybody was there. It was an outrageous experience. And I remember as I was making my way up for a reading of Rosicrucian and Sufi poet by the great poet Robert Bly by candlelight in the Renaissance Hall in the Alchemical Castle. I was making my way up to the castle. through the little winding cobbled streets, and suddenly the full moon rose above the battlements. And I thought, who orchestrated this? It wasn't me. I mean, there was just a magic to it all. Little did I know, though, that fabulous though that was, that it would wind up going on for 21 years, which is what, as I said, this is now going to be the 12th Esoteric Quest. We didn't even call them Esoteric Quest then. We started calling them Esoteric Quest because we needed a website. And also, there was a conference on the Western Esoteric or the Western Mystery Tradition. So that first one was in Český Krumlov, on this whole period that the great historian Francis Yates called the Rosicrucian Enlightenment, which is the late 16th, early 17th century, when alchemy, Kabbalah, Hermetic philosophy, and Neoplatonism all come together to create this mysterious period filled with magic. Anybody who's been to Prague knows you can feel it. Where does this come from? Why does Prague feel such a magical place? And of course, a lot of people don't get out of Prague, but head on down to Český Krumlov next time you're in Bohemia, because of course Czechoslovakia was just created after the Treaty of Versailles in 1919. The ancient kingdom of Bohemia goes back 1,000 years. So I think of Bohemia as the spiritual home of these esoteric quests. And then we did another one 2 years later in Prague, alchemy and the Hermetic tradition. It was a celebration of Rudolph II, the Holy Roman Emperor, who made Prague the imperial capital and was himself deeply interested in alchemy. His personal spiritual advisor was a Kabbalist. We haven't had too many Catholic Holy Roman Emperors who were spiritually advised by Kabbalists, but he was a very interesting man. Then we did another one in Wales, where I was born, on the Grail and the Arthurian traditions. Then we did another one in Florence on the Italian Renaissance and the esoteric traditions. Most people don't realize that the Renaissance, through people like Marsilio Ficino and Pico della Mirandola, was filled with esoteric and spiritual wisdom that had come over from Constantinople and from Macedonia and indirectly from Alexandria, Egypt. So then we've done, I won't enumerate all of them, I'll just mention a few others. We did one on the golden age of Andalusia in Granada in Spain, Sufis, Kabbalists, Christian philosophers in medieval Spain. We did one on the island of Samothrace, which was one of the great mystery centers of antiquity for 1,000 years. The sanctuary of the great gods stood in the far northeast of the Aegean. Then we actually did one in Alexandria itself. I knew somebody at the library, so somebody had to do it. So I guess New Yorkers would call it sheer chutzpah, but you know, I went up to the Library of Alexandria and asked them if they would like to co-sponsor a conference with us to bring alive ancient Alexandria, because it's been rebuilt on the approximate site of the old library, and they were thrilled. They said yes. You'd think somebody else would have approached them, like Yale or Oxford or somebody, but nobody had. So we had a totally memorable experience right in the middle of the revolution there, or right before the first elections, first presidential elections. I don't think any of us will ever forget that experience in Egypt at that time. Then we did another in Sicily on the brilliant periods of Sicilian culture. When Sicily was ancient Greece's most significant colony, Plato and others were there. And on the Islamic period, people don't realize that Sicily, Palermo, was actually the jewel of the Islamic world in the 11th century. And then that Norman period, when Sicily would have been one of the two most tolerant parts of Europe in the 12th century, where you could have woken up in a little village in Sicily, you could have heard the cry of the muezzin from the minaret calling the faithful to prayer. In the Islamic world, you could have seen a rabbi walking down to the synagogue, and you would have had, equally as amazing, both Byzantine and Catholic Christians coexisting at a time when they had nothing good to say about each other, but they did in Sicily. So that was a wonderful experience in Sicily. And then last June, we did an esoteric quest in the south of France about troubadours, Cathars, Templars and the Grail in medieval Languedoc, the whole southwest France, where the Cathars, who I'm sure many of you have heard of, these remarkable Gnostic Christians, had an extraordinary culture before it was brutally suppressed. by the Inquisition and by the French kings. But it was a wonderful moment. It's hard to believe, but it's true that back around 1200 there was an esoteric arc that stretched all the way from the south of France through northern Italy into the Balkans, across into Armenia, through the Caucasus, along through Central Asia, Samarkand and Bukhara, along the Silk Road, down into China, and all the way down to the southeast coast of China. This is the world of Mani. And I know today we have a lot of stereotype notions of what the Manichaean impulse was about. It's not this fatuous notion of an eternal war between good and evil. It's a far deeper esoteric thing than that. Of course, they didn't call themselves Manichaeans. They called themselves followers of the holy religion of light. Anyway, it's true that people, I was amazed. One of the things I love about doing these esoteric quests is that I always learn a huge amount from them as well in doing them. But yeah, just imagine that. An esoteric arc attuned to the holy religion of light, the world's first world religion, where Mani came out of 3rd century Mesopotamia and understood that Christianity, Buddhism, and Zoroastrianism all spoke of the same essential truth. So that was last year. And now, having been, as I was mentioning, all the way around the Mediterranean, not that we planned it this way, these quests are guided by something more than just rational calculation. I only wish we could roll out the next 10 and I knew what they were going to be, but it's an intuitive process to see where we go. So after doing Spain, Italy, Greece, Egypt, Sicily, and back to the south of France again, nobody imagined that we would be going to the north, to the mysteries of the north. In Iceland, it wasn't what a logical calculation would have suggested. But then, when the idea came up, I was stunned to find that Iceland is actually, I guess the right word for it is hot. It's one of the hottest destinations in the world right now. I had no idea. People absolutely love Iceland. I mean, I've been trying to get to Iceland for over 40 years. Used to be able to take a ferry, a trawler from the north of Scotland for £7 back in the 60s. But it's not that much more when you get there. It's not so cheap. But anyway, yeah, Iceland is just an extraordinary place. So, of course, I went there. I was there in October to set up our quest and to find the right place to do it. So it was a challenge, you know, where is it going to be, what's got the right vibes, what will really give us a sense of the cosmic quality and the mysteries. So I would say that this area here, it's come out a little more widely than I thought it would. I don't know why the screen is wider than it should be, but imagine that that's probably going to be the cover of the brochure. What Andrea handed out to you was a rough version of the brochure. It's 80% done. We'll finish it in the near future and it'll be going to the printer very soon, of course properly designed, but that gives you a basic sense. It hasn't been all fully proofed, etc., but it gives you a basic sense of the content of what our quest is going to be in Iceland. So ever since going to Iceland, and actually even before that, I have been deeply immersed in the realm of Norse mythology. And I don't know about you, but when I was a boy, I always loved Odin and Thor and all these gods. And it's been interesting looking for images that could work for tonight's presentation. You put the names of the Norse gods into Google Images, and whoa! It is stunning how the Norse gods have spoken to the contemporary imagination. The number of comic books, graphic novels, not to mention the 19th century artists who got into this. There's something about the Norse gods that speaks really, really deeply to the imagination. Not to mention heavy metal. I don't know if we have any heavy metal fans here tonight, but I'm told that there's a whole genre of heavy metal. It's all to do with the Norse gods. So it speaks in a profound way. And somebody I have a lot of respect for, which is Rudolf Steiner, the great philosopher Rudolf Steiner, said that he found something unique in Norse mythology that no other mythology actually possesses, that it has a relevance to contemporary esotericism unlike any other mythology. So this is the kind of thing that we will begin to explore. So that's where we start out, in Snaefellsnes. So you can see those mountains in the distance there, one of the holy mountains, water. Iceland is volcanic. It's a wild place. And there it is, That's Iceland itself. And see, right here is Reykjavik, right there. And where we're going to be is all the way out here in Hekna. There's a little village just there called Arnarstapi, which is widely considered the most beautifully situated village in the whole of Iceland. All I can tell you is it took me 6 days to find this place. And when I stepped out of the car, I took 3 steps and I went, wow, this is the place. I mean, I have to, when I think of it's vast, it's empty, it's beautiful, but really the word that comes to mind that expresses the feeling there is it's cosmic. It feels downright cosmic. Because, you're right there, out here on this tip. The white there is the Snaefellsnes, so that is the snow mountain glacier, which is a national park. But this is sacred land, dating way back. On the north side of the Snaefellsnes around here is Helgafell, one of the major Viking sacred mountains. And of course the Vikings, we think, oh yeah, it was all pillage and plunder and But I think I've come to see that most of us have a really simplistic notion of the Vikings. There was a lot more to them than met the eye. Now some of us spent the weekend or Saturday with the wonderful Nancy Marie Brown, who gave us 2 great half-day workshops. She's written 5 or 6 books on Iceland, and she really knows her stuff inside out. And as she can tell us, most of what we know about the Viking gods doesn't come from Norway or Sweden or Denmark. It actually comes from 13th century Iceland, from a character known as Snorri Sturluson, who wrote the Edda, the prose and the poetic Edda. That's what they're called, which actually told the stories. Snorri gathered all the myths and legends and tales from around Iceland and put them all together and was a brilliant, brilliant storyteller. So that's the guy. He was a chieftain and a writer. Some people think he was actually the greatest writer of the Middle Ages. He was certainly the greatest little-known writer of the Middle Ages, because we're just not that tuned into the culture. So here we're going to start off here in Reykjavik. The airport is around here. We're going to do our pre-conference day around here. We're going to stay at a little place called Grindavik down here. Right around here is the legendary Blue Lagoon. Anybody who's been to Iceland has been to the Blue Lagoon, possibly the most. We'll have a picture of that in a minute. That's the most famous thermal bath. There's a wonderful Viking museum here. We'll spend the night in Reykjavik. So we're going to start off with our pre-conference day, because one of the things about Iceland that I don't know why they do it, there must be some logistical reason, but when you fly into Iceland from North America, for some reason all the flights arrive around 5 o'clock in the morning. So unless you go a day early, you're going to be pretty jet lagged. And the guy who wrote the Lonely Planet Guide told me that the best place to get over jet lag is the Blue Lagoon, because then you can soak in these tremendous thermal waters. And just to go over quickly, so we're going to start off here. We're going to do the pre-conference day down there. We have a day where we have an evening in Reykjavik over here. Then we're going to go to around here, where we're going to spend the first night in a town called Selfoss. Foss means waterfall. There's waterfalls everywhere, as you can see in Iceland. And then we will head out along the Snaefellsnes Peninsula. That's where we will spend most of our conference, out here. This is the Greenland Sea. So this is as close as you can get to Greenland without actually being in Greenland. And then those of us who go, there are going to be 2 post-conference options. The one we've developed furthest so far, there's a place called Stykkishólmur, which is on the north side of here near Helgafell, that Viking sacred mountain. And we're going to sail across the Greenland Sea to this area up on the top there. See, it's like Iceland's own little Iceland. It's the most remote part of Iceland, the least visited part. It's said to be completely magic, silent, empty, and mystical. I'm told by Iceland, who spent sustained periods of time there, that time stops. And so we're going to go there. Our post-conference journey is going to take us around the West Fjords. See, even though Iceland has become popular, most people just do what they call it, the golden circle that goes all the way around the island like that. But we're going to be away from that. We're going to be to the west in the Snaefellsnes Peninsula, and then we're going to be in the West Fjords. So you couldn't actually have a more mystical and esoteric part of Iceland than the one that we're going to. All right, that just gives you a sense, in case you're wondering where Iceland is. One of the things Iceland has, see these black lines? Iceland is on the separation of the tectonic plates. The actual tectonic plates that separate the eastern and the western hemisphere, they meet in Iceland, and that's what that black line is all about. And in fact, on our second day, we're going to actually go to the place Thingvellir, which is where the Icelandic Parliament was held. Now, how did they know that it happens to be right where the tectonic plate is between the two hemispheres? You can actually stand with your foot on either side of the tectonic plate. They're separating at a rate of 2 centimeters a year, I'm told. So, but there are beautiful waterfalls there. You know, Iceland was the place with the first parliament. People left Norway, they didn't want to be under the heel of the king, they wanted to be independent, they wanted to be free, so they created the first parliament where the law was king for many years, and one person was deputized to remember the laws. So that's where we will go, to Thingvellir, and we'll have our first meditation attuned to the natural world out there in the mountains beyond Thingvellir. So that, you see where it is. It's a long way north. Here's the UK and Ireland, of course. There's Scandinavia, there's Greenland. So you see we're going to be out here on this peninsula here and out there. So when I say that we're as close as you can get to Greenland without actually being in Greenland, I mean it. So we do want somebody to come in and give it, as well as the Icelandic storytellers, the sagas, the Eddas, the music. We actually want to hear too a little bit about the ecology, because that's an unrivaled place to gain insight into what's going on with global warming, etc. Okay, so there you go, and that's another picture of Snaefellsnes and the Kirkjufell. Is that how you say it? Who speaks Icelandic here? It's embarrassing to try to get you. I'm getting there a little bit by bit. So anyway, that just gives you a sense of the beauty, the majesty, the distance, the space of it all. Like I say, cosmic is the word for it that comes to mind for me. And now we're back here. I'm going back to the beginning again. Here we are. This is the Blue Lagoon. So you can imagine, unless you go a day early, we're going to get off the plane. We can't check into the hotel immediately because they don't check in until noon or so. We'll go to the hotel, we'll drop off our bags, and then we're going to head straight for the Blue Lagoon. And I don't know anybody who's been there hasn't loved it. So it's surrounded by, it's in a lava field. It's huge, you know, there are mud baths. I mean, look, nobody's claiming it's off the beaten track. It ain't. It's very much on the beaten track. I mean, you can have a beer while you're soaking in the tubs, but it's, by all accounts, an absolutely beautiful experience. So that just gives you a little sense of what it's going to be like. We're going to soak that first morning, and as I said, it's a great way to get over jet lag. Then we'll go to the hotel. Then we'll have lunch, actually, at the Blue Lagoon. Then we'll go to the hotel and crash out for a few hours, because we're all going to need it. And then later in that afternoon, we're going to go to a Viking museum, which has a restored Viking longboat in it that's out there on that. And then we'll wind up with the evening in Reykjavik, the capital of Iceland. So a little taste of the Blue Lagoon there. And this is actually where the conference is going to begin. I know that looks like a painting, but that actually exists. When I saw that, I said, yeah, that's the place. That's the first evening, the evening of the 24th. So the pre-conference day is the 23rd. On the 24th, we will be meeting in there. That's called Ingolfskali. It's named after Ingolf Firewolf, who was the Viking founder of Iceland. And that's the entrance. You know, it's a rebuilt Viking longhouse. It's the real thing. I mean, you really, well, I thought, wow, I mean, this has to be the place where we where we started. So you can see a few little engravings there, and we've got these braziers on the outside, but it's a longhouse, you know, covered in turf. And in fact, Icelanders right up until the 19th century, early 20th century, just lived in these little turf-covered homes that were half buried in the earth. That's why there's so little architecture to see in Iceland, because only the wealthy Danish merchants could afford to build fancy houses that were worth restoring. And so when the 20th century came along, you know, with concrete and corrugated iron and stuff like that, nobody bothered retaining, except for a few museums, the old Icelandic homes, very humble homes, to say the least. Except for a few little villages like Stykkishólmur, where you can still see the Danish merchants' homes. So yeah, we're going to go straight into the Viking world and the Viking vibe. Here's a little bit more of a map that gives you a sense of this. Here we are. This is the peninsula out here. Arnarstapi, the most beautifully situated village in the whole of Iceland. Heklar, which is where we're going to be. And those mountains, the Snaefellsjökull, all those beautiful mountains, it all comes here. And you can see up in the top left-hand corner what part of Iceland we're going to be in. Can you see that up there in that little image? That is. And what I'm hearing is that we're going to have some wonderful Icelandic presenters there, including some great musicians. I don't know how. We're keeping our fingers crossed that Björk is going to come. I mean, I'm not joking. A lot of the musicians who are with us are very close to Björk, who was a member of an esoteric group, I'm told, before she became famous. But there's the most famous band in Iceland is called Sigur Rós. Some of you may have heard of it. And so we're going to have some of the musicians from Sigur Rós who are going to come and play with us. But there's a group of 10 performers who are coming out from Reykjavik. They're all going to stay in a farmhouse nearby, and they're going to do 3 evenings of music from the Eddas, music from the sagas. It's going to be a whole multimedia performance with some of Iceland's most creative musicians, including a guy called Hilmar. Everybody's called Hilmar. Hilmar Ohm Hilmarsson, who is he's the chief pagan of Iceland. You may have read that there's the first temple, the first pagan temple is being built in Iceland in 1,000 years. And Hilmar is the guy who's really behind it, but he's also a very gifted musician and composer. He's composed a lot of music scores. So we're going to have some outrageous performances there. But the reason we're getting these great guys coming out is because they're thrilled that we're doing it where we are, out in Heklar, and they love the theme of what we're doing. Of course, the great thing about going to these cultures is that we're there to honor that culture. And so whether it's in France or Spain or Greece or Egypt or wherever it is, we're totally there to really honor and to go into and respect and to learn in every way we can from that culture. And so we're always looking to find that right balance between some of our own presenters who come from Europe and North America and so on, and some of the local presenters. I just spoke to a woman today who we heard about over the weekend, from Nancy Marie Brown, and who is Iceland's leading authority on elves. Of course, the legend has it that 90% of Icelanders believe in elves. I'm told it's more like 60%, actually. Whatever it is, you're so far up there in distant realms away from the hurly-burly of everyday life that you can feel that there is something deeper going on. And I was even talking to somebody out there at the end of that peninsula who loves the Icelandic winters. She says it's her favorite time of year, believe it or not. She said she spent winters in Copenhagen and she hated it. It was grim and it was dark. But in Iceland, even in the dead of winter, somehow the sea retains the light. And the sky and the sea take on this magical half-light quality that she says is absolutely exquisite. But we're not going to push it and do an esoteric quest in the middle of the winter this time, even though it would have been nice if we wanted to see the northern lights. I don't think we're going to see a lot of the northern lights at this time of year. So anyway, that gives you some sense of where we're going to be. And that now we're back on the Snaefellsnes Peninsula again, where the main conference will be, just looking out towards the tip of the peninsula. So maybe you can get a sense of the majesty. I mean, I've lived in Scotland and Wales and so on, but it's like Scotland, but with another layer, with another 4,000 feet added to it. It's like, you know, some of it looks similar to the Celtic world, but there's another dimension to it. Of course, it was thought that most of the people in Iceland were just purely Vikings, but now thanks to DNA, we know it's not true. They're all a mix. They're a mix of Vikings and Celts, because the story is that the Vikings would, they come over from Scandinavia, and many of them were settled up in the Hebrides, the outer Hebrides in Scotland, and parts of Ireland too. And then they would pick up, it's not clear, we don't have the records, whether there was love connections. I don't know how much, whether it was just, pillage and this kind of thing. But anyway, Iceland is really a product, genetically speaking, of both Viking and Celtic cultures. So there you are, that's the Snaefellsnes world out there, gives you a little taste of it. Now let's look at the world of Viking mythology. Now, as you can see, it's mythic. The Vikings were ready for anything, but even they didn't have to deal with pterodactyls. So that just gives you a sense of how it stimulated the imagination, and how, as we learned from Nancy Marie Brown on Saturday afternoon, it wasn't just an incredible mythological system, they were tremendous adventurers. I mean, nobody disputes anymore that the Vikings were the first people to get to North America, because we all thought it was Columbus. Not so. In fact, women in Viking culture had a lot of respect. And in fact, one of the expeditions to what became one of the first settlements in the Gulf of St. Lawrence was led by Gudrid the Far Traveler. That was a woman who we heard, and in fact Nancy Marie Brown has written a biography of Gudrid the Far Traveler. So there it is. But that just gives you a sense that we're heading into the realm of mystery here. The realm of the Viking gods, because obviously in Iceland it's not like France or Spain where you've got castles and cathedrals. You've got nature in Iceland, but you've got the mythology, the deep, ancient, esoteric mythology. So yeah, look at that longboat. What did we hear from Nancy Brown? That it would take 4 women, how many years to just weave a sail? It was amazing how they, do you remember what it was? Was it 4 women, 4 years? It took 2 women 4.5 years just to weave one Viking sail. And then, they didn't have any, you couldn't go below ship, below deck to protect you from those icy North Atlantic waves. You could, what did they get into sealskin bags? But I mean, it was unbelievable, their hardiness and their adventurousness and their love of freedom. And it's interesting, one of the things we're brought up in the West, I think, of God, should we say, as omniscient. But in the Viking world, where did that omniscience come from? It's because Odin, the father god, had 2 ravens that perched on his shoulders. And every morning the ravens would set off at dawn to fly around the world, where they would see everything. And then they would return to Odin's shoulders and tell him everything that they had seen. And that's how Odin, the father god, was omniscient. And also the Vikings even, just a sec. And then the Vikings even, when they went on these far voyages, they too would carry ravens with them on their boats. And they would send those ravens out to scout out the land, and then if they came back with a twig in their beak or whatever, they'd know. Did anybody see the movie The 13th Warrior? Yeah, well, of course, remember when they're going up the fjord there and the guy's shooting the flaming arrow and they're shouting, Odin. I think we're going to, by the way, there's a little aside here that we're, there's a Viking exhibit happening right now in Times Square. What's the name of the place? the Discovery Center at Times Square, and it's supposed to be good. Everybody I've spoken to has said it's really great. So we're thinking that maybe in the not too distant future we'll organize for the Esoteric Quest an afternoon of going to the Viking exhibit, and then maybe we'll come down to the Open Center and watch the 13th Warrior. Does that sound like a good preparation for a quest in Iceland? I love then we can drink some mead while we're at it. Yeah, I'm sure there's some liquor store that sells mead. Yes, mead will be plentifully. Nina, yes.
One sail took 2 women 4.5 years, and the wool from 200 sheep using a drop spindle.
Yeah, so I mean, and the Vikings didn't do anything the easy way. It took a lot of hardship. And what is it, that wonderful line on the cover of the Sagas of Icelanders from Seamus Heaney about how it's the poetry of the North Atlantic. This is not a verbatim quote, but it shows how hardship can be dealt with and overcome, and how it can even enrich us spiritually. So the Viking sagas, which are the stories of the settlers and how Iceland was settled in around the 9th century, the 8th, 9th, and 9th, 10th century, is when it all began to happen, with people coming over from Norway. I mentioned that they were looking for freedom after a rather tyrannical king arose in Norway, and they were going to do their own thing. So there's always been a huge respect for freedom in Icelandic culture, and a respect for women as well. So there we go. There's the Vikings. So let's step into the world of mythology. So there he is, Odin. That's a 19th century painting. What the one-eyed god, the most shamanic of all the father gods. Odin, who hangs for 9 days and 9 nights on the tree of Yggdrasil, the world tree, where he sacrifices an eye. He loses one of his eyes. You can see his hat is down there, sort of covering it on his left eye. But he gains what many people would call the second sight. He gains the third eye. He gains spiritual knowledge and spiritual wisdom. So Odin is the most shamanic. Odin is on a quest. And somebody who's enormously influenced by the Icelandic Eddas and sagas, particularly the Edda of Snorri Sturluson, is Tolkien. Because you read the Eddas and you suddenly find there's Gandalf. We've even got a guy coming to the conference. He's into the sacred architecture, the sacred landscape of Iceland. He's called Thorarinson. Wasn't there a guy, wasn't that one of the dwarfs in the Hamlet, Thorarin? I mean, it's amazing. You start off not being able to pronounce everybody. All the men are, Erlendsson, and it's all, and then you realize, it's just son at the end, and then at the end, it took me 6 months to figure out all the women are called Jonsdottir at the end, D-O-T-T-I, and suddenly it clicked, it's daughter. Yes, it's just son and daughter. It's one of those other instances where, the Norse languages really imbue the English language. It really is amazing how many different words come from that culture. So there is Odin. He's on his quest. He has his ravens, and there's a whole vast realm of Norse mythology. Let's go on here. Now, who do you think those are? I know some of us know who they are. Those are the 3 Norns, N-O-R-N-S, the 3 Norns who live at the root of one of the 3 roots of the tree of Yggdrasil. Remember the world tree, which Odin hangs on, where he loses his eye but gains the spiritual sight? And at the root of that tree, or one of those roots, next to the well of remembrance, or the well of memory, are the 3, as Shakespeare called them, the 3 weird sisters. Because remember in Macbeth, when I used to live in this part of Scotland, where in Forres in the north of Scotland, where Macbeth stumbles across the 3 weird sisters. Shakespeare made them into, I'm not sure he calls them witches, he calls them the 3. And the word weird, back in the 16th century, it didn't just mean weird as we think of it today. It meant sort of esoteric, mysterious, and so on. The way of weird, that was the way of the Saxon shamans. But yeah, there they are. Those are the 3 Norns. And Shakespeare Remember, and Macbeth stumbles across them, and they say, double bubble, toil and trouble, hail, Thane of Cawdor. Because how did Shakespeare know all this? I mean, I just saw Shakespeare's Pericles a couple of weeks ago, and it was a whole incredible creation of the Artemis of Ephesus. I mean, I was stunned, but that's a digression. So Shakespeare was an amazing guy. So there are the three Norns, and so they weave the fabric of our destiny. So as you'll remember, those of you who've seen the 13th Warrior, when they're about to wait for those demonic beings to attack them, and the humorous and comical Viking turns to Antonio Banderas, who's playing a guy who's been exiled from the court of the Caliph of Baghdad, and he says, don't worry, little brother, you know, our destiny is already set. We don't need to worry about it. We'll die when we die. It's not worth giving a second thought to. And that's what they believe. They believe that the three Norns wove the fabric of destiny. And also that same guy in the 13th Warrior has a tremendous sense of humor. The more I've learned about the Vikings, the more I see how authentic that film was. Because the Vikings, you know, and Odin, we think of them, of course, as tremendous warriors, which they were, and adventurers, but they were poets as well. Odin was the god of inspiration, of both poetry and warriorship. So you were the man in the Icelandic or the Viking world if you were both a poet and a warrior. And then you had really nailed it. It was a real life. If you were not only a poet and a warrior, but if you died heroically in battle, and if your last word was a jest, that was it. Didn't get any better than that for a Viking. Because, of course, then their view was that the Valkyries, the swan maidens, would come swooping down from the heavenly realms and would take up the soul of the dying warrior up into the halls of Valhalla. As we remember from the 13th Warrior, where the brave shall live forever. So, you know, so there's a whole incredible mythic world of the Aesir, the sky gods, the Vanir, the earth gods, of elves, of dwarfs, of dragons. I mean, it's all straight out of Tolkien. You know, Tolkien was massively influenced by, as I was saying, the Icelandic Eddas, and also by the Finnish Kalevala, the great Finn. That was apparently his favorite version of it all. So let's go on to a little bit more. That's Heimdall, one of the many. You know, I never heard of Heimdall, or Heimdall. He's the silent god. Well, he's considered one of the silent gods. He's the warden of the gods. See his great trumpet there? He guards, see the rainbow? He guards the rainbow bridge from Midgard to Asgard. Now Midgard, we all know what Midgard is. You just translate that into English. It's Middle Earth. So once again, Tolkien takes it straight from the Norse mythology. So when he sees the giants approaching the rainbow bridge from Midgard to Asgard, he blows a great blast on his trumpet to warn the gods of the approach of the evil forces. And of course, one of the things that's unique or remarkable about Norse mythology is that it does lead to a climactic battle. The Battle of Ragnarok, as it's called, or as Nietzsche called it, Twilight of the Gods, Gotterdammerung in German. So it all does. The gods, you know, are these incredible heroic beings who take on these demonic forces that arise from the psyche, the Midgard serpent and the Fenris wolf. And the world does all come to an end, but it's reborn. It's reborn in a new culture, and a very beautiful new culture, because Vidar, one of the sons of Odin, with his iron boot, puts his boot within the jaws and breaks the jaw of the Fenris wolf. In fact, I met somebody at a conference who edits a journal called the Fenris Wolf. But I mean, this is just giving little hints around the edges here of all of these gods. We have no prizes of who this next guy is. We all know who he is. Thor, the thunder god. One of the major beings. Like I say, there's any number of illustrations. I could put up there 200 different versions of Odin, but I like that one. I thought that captures his, because it is a world, and when we think of Odin too, Odin, he's the god of, along with Thor, of storm. So Odin would, when you're in the forest at night, not that there are many forests in Iceland, and the wind is howling through the forest and there's all kinds of mysterious sounds, then Odin was said to be riding his magical 8-legged steed on the thunder and the winds through the forest at night. So there's Thor. This is obviously it's a 19th century painting of one of the love goddesses, because in the Viking world it wasn't all about blood and thunder and all the rest of it. It was, and you see the apple there. Can you see that she's giving the apple to these warriors? The apple that was seen as a symbol of wisdom and of insight into higher spiritual worlds. So there we see a lovely rendition, sort of 19th Victorian style, as it were, of the whole of that mythology. And then that came a little more, but you can see it, that's actually an image of Freya. So Freya is the goddess of love, among many other things. And you see her there, I guess the artist has seen fit, they look like lynxes to me, rather than nice little pussycats. But she's being pulled by some feline beings on her chariot there as she moves through this world. So each one of these figures of the gods is just hugely rich, and we're going to be going into that more in depth in Iceland. Now I want to come back when we leave the conference proper from the 24th to the 29th, when we're out in Heknar. We'll actually be in Heknar from the 25th to the 29th, because we're going to have a night in Selfoss and then start things off in that Viking longhouse belonging to Ingolf Firewolf. But then we're going to head off. So, I should say that while we're out there, we're going to do various things. I mean, everything in Iceland is weather dependent. So it's like, okay, normally we say, all right, we're doing this workshop on Wednesday afternoon and so on. You ain't doing that in Iceland. Icelanders even take their vacations according to the weather. And everybody understands this, even corporate things. When the sun comes out, everybody takes a vacation. So this is what everybody says. When you go out in Iceland, even in August, even though we're going to be there at the end of August, we'd have to be really unlucky for it to be happen. But it has been known to snow at the end of August. So I don't think it's very likely. But but it just means when you go out in Iceland, and one of the things we're going to do is we're going to go up to the Snaefellsnes, the glacier, and we're going to be able to take walks on the glacier. But every time we go out, we're going to have to take a coat, a hat, gloves. Because the weather can turn on a dime. I mean, how you're way up there, you're not that far from the Arctic Circle. So you've got to be ready for anything. So, as I mentioned, we're going to Olafsvik out here. We're going to, one of the things we're going to offer in the afternoon is we're going to offer whale watching. So why not? It's supposed to be one of the greatest places in the world to see sperm whales and orcas. So right here in this, and so there's horseback riding too, the Icelandic ponies, which are pretty unique in having 5 gates. So that's all out here. And then we're going to leave this place, Stykkishólmur, and we're going to head across here to the West Fjords. There's a little island where there was a monastery there for centuries, Flatey Island. And then we're going to make our way around, you can see that road, we're going to make our way around the West Fjords. We're going to have 2 nights up at Ísafjörður, see there? And in fact, weather permitting, we're even going to take a boat from Ísafjörður right up, see that peninsula right up there in the very northwest? That was where Iceland's leading practitioner of the skald there, a woman who still had the second sight. She only died recently, but she was somebody who, I've met actually an academic who studies the fact that in the north and west of Iceland you still have practitioners of the old intuitive psychic ways. Just like in the Celtic world, you still have a few people with the gift of the second sight. It's been very much preserved in Iceland. So that's where she lived, right up there in the northwest corner of the whole of Iceland. So weather permitting, I'm going to do it. I might be on the boat by myself, but I'm going to take a boat from Ísafjörður across there to visit the tiny little hamlet where this woman lived until her recent death. And hopefully we can meet some of her family members. Because one of the nice things about Iceland is at least young people speak English. And well-educated people in general speak English in Iceland. So it makes life easier for us. So we're going to start up, we'll go across here, we're going to wind up in Patreksfjörður, Ísafjörður, Hólmavik. We're going to have our last night there, and then we come back down again. So, as I mentioned, the West Fjords are the most silent, mystical, otherworldly realm. The feeling I get from reading about it is that it is the place where time stands still. So if we've already been out on the Snaefellsnes Peninsula for 4 days, and then after that we go for another 5 or 6 days in the West Fjords, we are definitely going to be in an altered state of consciousness. And one of the people coming with us is a guy called Jesse Bransford. Did any of you go to the conference that NYU organized recently on the occult humanities? It's great. It's looking at the intersection of art, psychoanalysis, and the esoteric. Anyway, he's a guy he's an artist. He's a professor at NYU too, but he did a whole art project with another guy around an old Icelandic dream practice from the Middle Ages, intended to attune you to the landscape and to ancestors and so on. So Jesse is going to give a workshop on that in the afternoon. He's also going to come with us on that. So when what did I call it? An immersion in silence and beauty. So those of us who choose to are actually going to be able to engage in this Icelandic dream practice. And then we can share it together in the evenings around the hearth. And of course, we're hoping to get some of the locals to tell us some of the Icelandic sagas. But this is going to be, it's not all castles. It ain't the south of France. It's going to be mystical beauty. If you're a sucker for that kind of thing, and I am, I love emptiness and vastness and beauty and wonder. I think it reminds me of the very first trip the Open Center did back in 1984. We went to Alaska. We were all 30 years younger. And we rafted the Tatshenshini-Alsek River, one of the great river raft rides in the world, along with the Grand Canyon. This is in ice instead of snow. And it reminds me, that's the last time the Open Center went anywhere near as remote as this. So, put on your hiking boots, bring good hat and gloves and some waterproof. But, we'll intend to go to the sacred places. We'll walk the fjords, we'll gather in the evenings to share our dreams. It's going to be a meditative exploration into a deeper state of consciousness. So I think you can say that post-conference is going to be very experiential. All right, so what else? Some images of the West Fjords. That is that's Patreksfjörður, the first place that we'll be staying. Anybody up for that? Look at that. I mean, what can you say? I mean, what's not to like? Except maybe the temperature. But I mean, I think that is the kind of vibe that the West Fjords is going to have. That silence, that beauty, that stillness. Of course, it could also be raging tempests and gales, and we might be cowering in shelters from the howling elements, even in August. Well, it'll be early September, but actually we go to the West Fjords on the 29th of August. So we catch the last few days of August, and then we go around it until the 4th of September. But anyway, that's the West Fjords for you. And one more image. And that's another sense of just that. I hope it's enough to just give people a sense of the vibe of what the West Fjords is going to be about. And then let's just to bring us back to our overall theme. And we're going to be there, the boys, setting off in their dragon-headed ship to to encounter whatever adventures life may unfold for them. But I mean, I can tell you that I've been getting more and more deeply into the world of the Norse mysteries, and it is wonderful, it is deep. It's every bit as esoteric as anything that we, even though we think it's all, you know, pillage and plunder and warfare, and of course the tragedy with this kind of mythology is that there's a big overlap between the Norse and the Teutonic mythology. So Hitler and his goons, you know, they tried to, you know, co-opt a lot of this mythology for their own demonic purposes. So I mean, we have to approach this from a really impeccable spirit. But I think after 11 Esoteric Quests, I think we're pretty well prepared to do that. So yeah, I mean, that actually looks a bit like the Snaefellsnes with that chain of mountains going down there. And we will see. We will learn about the Viking seeresses, the Völvas, who were greatly valued for their ability to see into the future, their attunement to the Norns, who weave the web of destiny. We will go deeply into all the world, the whole panorama of the Viking gods. We'll look at the world of the elves. We'll live into the saga of the Völuspa that tells the tale of the evolution of their world, and then Ragnarok, and then the rebirth of the world through the silent god Vidar, mysterious silent god who's to do with the rebirth of the world after the twilight of the gods. And I can't wait to go. So, do we have any questions? Andrea's here to answer any practical questions that we may have about it all. Yes, Nina?
What hotel are you staying at in Reykjavik?
Oh, we're not staying in a hotel in Reykjavik. We're going to be out. Let's go back to the. We're going to stay at those of us who come early for the pre-conference day. We're going to be in a place called Grindavik, which is just south of the airport, because you want to be close to the airport because it'll be 5:30 in the morning and we'll all be wasted. So we need to get to the hotel. Yeah, you're just. I mean, it's, you know, 5 o'clock in the morning Icelandic time is midnight New York time, or 1 o'clock in the morning depending on the. So I mean, you're just about ready to crash when you land. So, so I mean, if you can do it, come a day early. But if not, you know, so we'll just drop the bags. As I said, then we'll go to the Blue Lagoon, soak. I mean, you should get a really nice nap after soaking in the Blue Lagoon for 2-3 hours. Have lunch at the Blue Lagoon, then go to the hotel when we can check in, crash out at the hotel for, you know, a few hours in the early part of the afternoon, and then we'll go on to that Viking museum, which has the replica of the longboat. And then we'll have dinner in Reykjavik that first night. So then for those people who come early, what we'll do the next day, the 24th, the actual day that it begins, the conference begins in the evening. So we'll take people into Reykjavik and we'll give people either a guided tour of downtown Reykjavik or give them a map so they can find the museums and cultural places, and then come in, pick people up around 3 o'clock in the afternoon, and then it's about an hour, 45 minutes, hours drive to the east to this town of Selfoss. Selfoss itself is nothing special, but it has, it's very close to that Viking longhouse. So we'll just be there. People may need to crash out for a little time. You can get there's a sauna, you can get some body work there. There's even a little elf museum right down on the coast. We're going to give people a chance to go to the elf museum. It also has a great deck right on the ocean too. So if you want to get out on the deck and sink a beer or two Viking style before the conference begins, or mead preferably if you can get your hands on it. So yeah, so then the first night then for people who just come to the conference proper will be in Selfoss, but we'll launch the conference in Ingolfsskali, the longhouse, and then the next morning, the 25th, we'll go up to Thingvellir, you know, where the Icelandic Parliament was, and then we'll go into the mountains for our first meditation, because our friend Haraldur Erlendsson, who really has made this possible. I mean, when we thought, somebody had suggested when we were in France that we might do Iceland, it was like, Iceland? I don't know anybody in Iceland. Yeah, I know you were. And then I thought, well, who do I know, you know? And I remembered the Esoteric Quest that we did in Central Europe in 2006, from Renaissance Bohemia to Goethe's Weimar. I remember there was a really sweet guy from Trondheim in Norway called Halvard. And he's a Facebook friend of mine, so I just dropped Halvard a line saying, Halvard, do you know anybody in Iceland? You know how they're telling me, oh, I know something. He sends me like a 2-line email, yes, try this guy, Haraldur Erlendsson. Of course, when I reached Harald, he said, you can call me Harold. I said, I don't want to call you Harold. I want to feel like I'm in Lord of the Rings, Haraldur. It sounds like, so he's Haraldur as far as I'm concerned. But anyway, I had a Skype connection with Haraldur, and boom, I had one 90-minute Skype conversation. It was like, boom, the whole Esoteric Quest just rolled out right in front of me. I mean, not quite, but it was, I've never had that experience before. It was just like an immediate experience of knowing that the gods are with us on this one. It's just been one extraordinary set of synchronicities after another. And so Haraldur was my primary guide when I went to Iceland in October to scout it around and set things up. And there, you know, I'd planned to go to the north of Iceland, to the capital of North Iceland, Akureyri, but there were huge storms that came in. You know, this is the cusp of October and November. And big snowstorms and high winds, sub-zero temperatures, and you have to go over the mountains to get to the north. And all the Icelanders said, don't even think about it. The last place you want to be is stuck on a road in the mountains in Iceland. I mean, people die doing this kind of thing. And so I tried going east. Didn't really find anything that interesting along the south coast except for the Westman Islands, which are fascinating looking. They have a Burning Man type festival out there every year. I told the guy who rented us a car has been. He told us it was great, and it looks mysterious. But you know, just as we thought that it was thought that Iceland was deserted until the Vikings got there, but in fact there were Celtic monks living in the Westman Islands. Westman in Norse means Irish. So yeah, so there were. Can you imagine what was that like to be a Celtic monk in the islands off the shores of Iceland in like the 6th century or something like that? I mean, talk about being away from it all. I mean, whoa, you had some great meditations out there, if you could survive the climate. Yeah, so then, yes, go ahead.
I was just going to say, it's a long drive to Snaefellsnes, so...
Yes, so it's about an hour from Selfoss up to Thingvellir, 45 minutes to an hour. We'll spend an hour or so up around Thingvellir, where the Parliament was, and the waterfall, and we'll go up into the mountains for this place that Haraldur and I found. He's calling it the Dragon's Field. I don't remember, when we were there, it was perfect. The sky, there was nobody there, it was deserted, there was this beautiful silent river snaking its way through the landscape, and you would look, and it felt like you were looking north to the Arctic. You know, there was this beautiful pale blue light as you look to the north, and I just thought, this is the place. This is going to be the first place for us to really do a nature meditation. Because as we say in the brochure, in old Iceland, in medieval Iceland, it was forbidden to engage in spiritual practice indoors. You had to go outside and do it with the Vanir and the Aesir, with the sky and the earth gods. So then we'll go, yeah, so it takes us about an hour to get up to Thingvellir. Then we'll head on to a place called Borgarnes, which is just at the beginning of the Snaefellsnes Peninsula. There's a fjord there. That's where many of the sagas are set, in that particular fjord. We'll stop for lunch in Borgarnes. There's another thermal pool for people who missed the Blue Lagoon. And there's also a museum there. And then we'll head out. It'll be another 2-hour drive to get out to Hefnar at the end. And that's where, and then hopefully the musicians will have been there before us, and we'll have dinner when we get there, and then we should go straight into the world of otherworldly Icelandic music and performance. Yeah. Yes, there's a second post-conference that we're just working on right now. It's going to be centered more around Reykjavik, so it's going to be less wild to the most remote areas. So we're considering some day trips based in Reykjavik to go to the various cultural events. I think we might be able to get to Snorri Sturluson's place in Reykholt, where he had his farm and his own kind of citadel, if you could call it that. But that's still in the early days. We should finish the brochure in the next week or so, and that'll be more described in full now. We're still working it out with the person there. But for people who don't really want more of that immersion in silence and beauty and the remoteness, who want something a bit more user-friendly and comfortable, that second trip is going to offer that.
So the second, is it alternate to the other one?
Yeah, it's alternate. No, you have to check. So we'll bring, when the conference ends on the 29th, some people will go on to the West Fjords, and others, including me, I'll be there in the prow of the Baldur ferry across the Greenland Sea. Yeah. And others will head back to Reykjavik for a more, what's the right word for it? What do you think, Andrea? Cosmopolitan. Now, forget tame. Lame. We forget tame and lame. No, I mean, because you do this kind of stuff, it kind of awakens the Viking spirit in you. You know, because I happened to get, when I got back from Iceland, I did my DNA thing, you know. You see those, they're advertised all the time. I did it through National Geographic. It takes months for you to get the results back. And actually, I woke up the morning I got back from Iceland. I thought, yeah, I'm going to check to see if I got my DNA results. And I did, and lo and behold, I'm 8% Scandinavian. and I'm 8% Siberian Finnish. I always loved the Lapps, you know, the reindeer herders up there. So I'm like 16% Nordic. So I'm not, that was a sweet thing to find out. I had no idea. I thought I was half Welsh and half Irish, which I am, but I've got all this. I'm even 11% Native American. That was the one that really thrilled me. So, you know, it's amazing. I recommend it if you haven't done this DNA stuff. It's pretty amazing figuring out who you are genetically. Okay, any other questions? Or Andrea, do you want to say anything?
I guess what I could say is that I would be your contact person. So any questions about travel, about accommodations, about registration, I'm the person. And we are going to have our brochure and also our updated website ready in the next few weeks. We're also going to have an April 2nd webinar.
Oh, good point.
As well, and we'll be sending out information about registration should be open for that in the next week. And so questions. My contact information will be on the completed brochure, and it is in the Open catalog. So I look very forward to hoping you guys to join us.
I have a question.
Hello.
For the conference itself, in the Longhouse, where will we be staying?
That's just the first night. We're only at that longhouse outside Selfoss for the first night. So we'll be staying in a hotel in the town of Selfoss, which is about just 10 or 15 minutes away by bus from there. So, yeah, Selfoss itself is nothing to write home about, except for the Elf Museum down by the ocean.
So the conference itself will be held in that hotel?
Yeah, no, that's only the first night. The first night is just there because we wanted to be in the Viking Longhouse, and then we want to go to Thingvellir, where the Parliament is, and where the tectonic plates meet the following morning. We felt we wanted to do that rather than just doing the whole conference out on Snaefellsnes. But after that first night there, the rest of the conference proper, the remaining 4 days, it's out on the tip of the or near the tip of the Snaefellsnes in this place, Hetnar.
Unlike our usual quests, we actually will be in 2 locations for the name.
Yeah, let me just, so that's where it begins again. That's in Ingolfskali. And so we start off here. Blue Lagoon is right around here. And the Viking Museum is around here. Then we have dinner in Reykjavik, and then Selfoss is around here somewhere. and then Thingvellir is around here somewhere, and then we will head over to Borgarnes. I think this is Borgarnes here. See that big fjord? That's where, as I was saying, a lot of the sagas are set there. And then we'll head out there. We'll have the 4 days of the conference out there. And yes, Nina.
Do you have a rough sense of how many people the tour can accommodate?
Well, when I first found that place, the Hecknar Hotel, as I said, I took 3 steps. And I thought, wow, this is it. We found it. And it looked like initially they just didn't have any rooms, or only a small number of rooms. And then the owner came back 3 days later and said, if you can move the dates back 3 days, I got 69 beds for you. So it was a bit of a miraculous thing. We're doing it right at the tail end of the season, just at the cusp of August. So nearly all of us will be accommodated out in the Hecknar Hotel.
By coincidence, these are the exact dates I was in Iceland the first time.
You were? Oh, well, that's sweet. There you go. Yeah. All right, anybody else ready to seize a Viking sword and create mayhem in Midtown Manhattan? Greg, you
I
like?
have a question for those who have actually visited Iceland, like you and Nina. Do you have a sense as to what the Icelandic people themselves are like in present time? Do they have a unique kind of way of being? I'm sure they do. But,
They're very nice, all the studies in positive psychology indicate that the Icelanders are the happiest people in the world.
Wow.
Well, they had the big financial crash, and it looks like the Danes may have overtaken them briefly. But in terms of well-being, Icelanders are incredibly together. In terms of their financial crash, they put the bankers in jail. And they've had a massively injected, stimulated their economy through this whole revival of tourism, or disappearance of tourism in an unprecedented way. Icelanders come across, they're friendly, they feel very egalitarian to me. I had nothing but men and women, people say women rule Iceland. The president of Iceland is a woman. You go past, the White House of Iceland, it's like a little house on a street corner. Not quite, but it's one step up from a regular house on a street corner. It ain't Buckingham Palace, it's certainly not the White House. People are modest, there's a very egalitarian distribution of income. It's a very progressive country. I liked it a lot. One thing I did notice with some of the older Icelanders is that they have an unusual affect. They're very kind of withdrawn. The first couple of Icelanders I met, one an architect and the other this pagan, they spoke English, their vocabulary was perfectly decent, but I'm sitting across on the other side of the table and I'm straining to hear them, just in a cafe. Because people are this. I talked to Haraldur, who's a psychiatrist, about why is this, and he just said it's to do with the old Icelandic culture, the cold, the long winters. It apparently produced a sort of withdrawn, a shy. Apparently, you've got when you first meet Icelanders, at least the older generation of Icelanders, it seems they're a bit withdrawn and shy, and then I noticed that when I was with Haraldur and we were going to different hotels and meeting places. He'd start off in a very formal way, and then after 5 minutes of, sort of mutual respect or whatever it was, then it loosened up and people began to smile and relax and so on. But younger Icelanders are not like that at all. Younger Icelanders have a similar affect to Western Europeans and Americans, I would say, and they're much more relaxed, much more outgoing, just much more emotionally available.
It sounds like it's a fairly egalitarian country.
Very egalitarian. I think it's one of the most egalitarian in the world. You don't see any rich people in Iceland, I didn't see anybody living on the streets or broke. I think it has one of the lowest crime rates in the world. Iceland is I came back thinking, whoa, I wouldn't mind spending some serious time here. I don't think the winter, but look, nobody's going to rate Reykjavik as the most beautiful city in Europe because, there are no trees in Iceland, or virtually no trees. So there's nothing made out of wood. there's no clay, so there's nothing to make bricks. So there's a huge amount of Reykjavik that is made out of concrete, I'm sorry to say.
Brightly painted.
But brightly painted. And there's a lot of there's a very lively artistic scene in Iceland, and a lot of the artists, the painters, are very spiritually oriented. I was there when I went there. I went with a friend of mine who was a painter. She painted that painting up on the 3rd floor at the Open Center, that one of Celtic mythology. And she was overwhelmed by how spiritually connected the world of contemporary Icelandic art is. And some of the Einar Jóhannsson, I think it's his name, you can go to his, there's a museum, he's a sculptor primarily around, and his whole, as soon as you walk in, all his sculptures are totally spiritual. I think you're that far north, and I think it takes you into a deeper state of consciousness than you are in just the everyday life in the city. You can't escape the vastness of the universe that you're part of.
I guess at that time of year, it'll still be much, much lighter. The days will still be much longer than they are now.
Yeah, well, I think we looked it up. I think it gets dark around 9 p.m. At the end of August. So we're 6 weeks past the solstice, or 5 or 6 weeks at that point. So it's not, the sun will go down.
Right.
Yeah, all right. Well, a few more questions, and it looks like it's time to wrap it up.
I was just going to
Yeah.
say, I think that tourism has increased exponentially in the past.
Yes, it has.
And the first time I went there, at this same time of year was in 2010, it wasn't that bad. And then I was there last March, and even in March, and we had VIP
Yeah.
reservations at the room, it was busy. And they're saying that even now in the winter, which they never had people show up in the winter, but they just have, there's only 300 and something thousand of them.
Right.
Have this huge, over a million. We're expecting maybe 1 million too. They don't even know. Just
Yeah, I mean, that's like I said, Iceland is one of the hottest destinations on the planet right now. But we're going to the far west. Some of the less, we're off the beaten path, the golden circle. There will be some people out there in the Snaefellsnes.
I wonder too, if a lot of those numbers, when I hear those numbers, I wonder if a lot of them are hit and run right in Reykjavik, doing stuff.
Yes, I suspect a lot. Yeah, it's just people on Icelandic air stopping for a few days, little taste of Reykjavik and move on. Yes.
Out in Snaefellsnes, there was no one.
Yeah, and the West Fjords, it's going to be even fewer. So yeah. Okay, well I think it's all over unless anybody has a final question. All right, well thanks very much for coming.
Thank you.
All right.